Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad that you are here. And I want to talk to you guys today about what hustle means to me now, right? I've called this podcast Heart-Led Hustle for a reason. And it's meant to be a play on words because it's kind of like, hang on a minute, aren't we not meant to be hustling? And we're not supposed to be hustling, or I should say, I don't believe in hustling in the way that maybe we have conditioned to believe that we should do it. And the reason why I've kind of is because of my own experiences with falling into that trap of overworking myself and believing that burning out was just like a part of what it meant to be successful. Now, as a psychotherapist now, who not only can look back on my own journey with a lot of curiosity and self-inquiry and understand where a lot of these beliefs and behaviors came from, but since then and over the years of my practice, I've worked with so many people who, come to me and have what looks like on the outside a very successful life, right? It has what society deems to be successful. They may have the multiple cars, the multiple houses, the first class flights, a lot of what we would look at as like those desirable materialistic shiny objects. And something that I realized throughout my own journey, and something that also I realized, when I work with a lot of these kind of clients who have this societal, I guess, perception of success, is that internally it's not successful, right? What we feel inside ourselves, the level of satisfaction that we have within ourselves, within our lives, the level of meaning that our lives has, the sense of purpose that we have, the feeling of like contentment, connection, and presence, none of those things are there. It's just all on the outside. And what I often work with as a therapist is people who come to me with all of these things and they say to me, why am I not happy? Why am I not happy? Why do I feel miserable? Why do I feel like something is missing? So in today's episode, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that from a real lived experience, from my own experience of having lost absolutely everything about 8 years ago at the time of recording this, and also some of the experiences of my clients, right? So about 8 years ago, I had what looked like on the outside a very successful business. I had built a very well-known brand name in the town that I lived. I had at that time, I had back in 2014, I had graduated my Bachelor of Health Science, and I was working as a clinical nutritionist at the time. Basically, what started as a concept that I came up with for a healthy grab-and-go pop-up store in the city took off like seemingly overnight. And we were then actually providing these ready-to-eat meals for thousands of people a day. We were stocking in grocery stores, in restaurants. We were doing home delivery food, packages. That eventually led into me opening a restaurant. I was doing a lot of public speaking gigs. I was consulting on wellness retreats. I was, being given awards for, the Young Businesswoman of the Year award for 30 under 30, like all of these things, right? And everything looked very glamorous on the outside. It looked like things were going really, really well. Now, it took me a really long time to talk about what happened because I felt a lot of shame that came with kind of what happened in the following years. So fast forward about 8 years later, and everything came crashing down like a glorious house of cards. I lost everything. I lost all my money. The business collapsed. I went into near bankruptcy. I ended up, another business kind of tried to buy it out for a very, very, very low amount of money. I tried to salvage my name, my reputation, and none of it really worked. I basically lost absolutely everything: my dignity, my sense of self-worth, my money, my business name, and everything. And this was not entirely, in the past, I used to say, oh, this was not my fault. When I look back on it through the lens of like compassion and just self-inquiry, a lot of the events that led to losing everything were absolutely my fault in the sense of the version of me and the definitions that I had in my mind around what success was and what it meant to be successful was not what I actually believed in my heart, right? I still was living and running my business through the conditioning of my childhood and through the learned behaviors and the learned mechanisms and the, I guess, qualities that had once upon a time kept me safe and protected as a little girl. And what I'm speaking to here is that, I have and still do have to some extent really strong people-pleasing tendencies, really strong perfectionistic tendencies. I really had this desire to kind of prove myself, this desire to be, to not show my vulnerability. I used to think that asking for help meant that I was weak and stupid. I used to, not want to show if anything was ever going wrong. Classic hyper-independence, that is who I was, and that is still who I am slowly trying to decondition. But if we think back to who I was at that time, and the version of me that was kind of like, deciding or making all of the decisions in my business, the version of me that, was jumping from one thing to another, that was growing too fast, that was investing in things too quickly, that was hiring too fast, that wasn't making clever decisions, that was hiring the wrong people, listening to the wrong advice, and not asking questions when I should have been. That version of me was what I would call the version of me who had done very surface level self-discovery work and kind of thought that she was all good, thought that she was all healed, right? Now, at the time, I was also in a very, very toxic relationship dynamic with my partner at the time. And it was a very manipulative dynamic. It was extremely codependent. And he was feeding a lot of my insecurities and a lot of my decisions that I made in my business at the time. So not only did we grow really, really, really fast, and I made a lot of rash decisions in that growth, I became a little bit, I would say, big-headed about it, a little bit egoic about it. I dismissed a lot of things that I should have picked up on. And in my desire to scale quickly and to grow quickly, I, took out a loan with the bank to open our restaurant at the time. And the loan was wrong. It was the wrong product for what I was doing. They issued me an overdraft and not a small business loan, which is a big mistake when it comes to actually building something and needing that small loan with the lower interest rate in order to be able to pay it off. So, long story short, the overdraft, we ended up using all of the money in the overdraft to build the cafe, to build the restaurant. And the interest rates on the overdraft were so high that it was impossible for us to make a dent in paying it back. So this overdraft is kind of pulling every amount of money, bits of income that were coming in, and it was just paying off the interest while keeping us in debt. And even though there was money coming into the business, it was disappearing as quickly as it came in to fulfill the staff wages and to pay this excess interest that we could never get on top of. Now, I was too proud to say anything. I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't know how to ask for help. The advice that I was getting was actually not right. I knew in my intuition that something was wrong, and yet I still didn't do anything. I still didn't say anything because I didn't want to be seen as stupid, which is one of my, inner self-beliefs that I had and carried for a long time, right? So basically, one day I'm talking to my brother and I'm talking to him about like how none of this is making sense. And it kind of starts coming out in the conversation. And he starts saying to me, well, hang on a minute, that doesn't make any sense. And I was like, oh, okay. So he asked me to send him through the paperwork that I had and the loan agreement that I had. And he said, why do you have an overdraft? I had no idea at the time that I should not have had an overdraft. I just thought that the person at the bank who was giving me the advice was telling me the truth, was giving me a product that was suited to my needs. I didn't think to question it. I didn't think to ask anybody else because I wasn't that aware, right? Anyhow, fast forward again, and we end up taking this bank, which was one of the larger banks in the country at the time. We ended up taking them through legal proceedings. And we ended up winning the case, meaning that they were found to be negligent because not only had they issued me an overdraft, but they issued me an overdraft without me even having any assets. So there was this huge question mark around how did this person even get this amount of money when they had no assets to even be able to to be able to offset that if should something happen. So that was a big, 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 I guess, revelation. There was a lot of relief for me because I didn't have to pay it back in the end, but also they didn't reimburse me for any of the losses that had been incurred as a result of me having that overdraft. So I was still left in a huge amount of debt because we still owed all of our creditors, we still owed all of our suppliers, we still owed so many people so much money because we were constantly focused on trying to pay off the interest of this overdraft. Now, all of that comes crumbling down. Basically, the business closes. I have to have all of these really, really hard conversations with all of the people in my business at the time. I have to admit to everybody that I'm broke, that I'm near bankrupt, that I have absolutely nothing to my name, and that I have to close the business. Now, it's like everything grew so fast. Everything looked so successful. Everyone would always congratulate me on what I had created, on who I was, on, how amazing my business was, how amazing it looked, how fantastic it was that I'd built such a wonderful brand. And, honestly, I always felt this sense of emptiness inside because I was working so hard to maintain this level of reputation that I had. And inside, I was absolutely crumbling. I was, in this toxic relationship with somebody who was highly manipulative, who was going through their own mental health issues. I was living for the weekends. I was partying a lot, which kind of really went against my identity of being a nutritionist. Like I was doing all this stuff around health, and yet I couldn't even look after myself properly because I was so stressed out that I couldn't wait for the weekend to be able to drink and to party and to forget about everything. I was up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning going into the kitchen. I was then into the cafe. Then I was getting changed and I was seeing clients. And then I was going to do a talk. And then I'd be home at 7, 8 o'clock at night to a partner who was depressed and there would be no food on the table and my dog hadn't been for a walk and the lights would all be off. And it was just such a depressing place to come to. And yet, in the face of everybody else, I had to pretend like everything was fine. I had to just keep going. I had to save face because this is who I thought I needed to be and this is what I thought I had to do. I ignored all of my money stuff. I ignored everything, just thinking everything would sort itself out. I didn't want to ask for help. I kept kind of people pleasing and appeasing my way into these horrible situations. And everything eventually came crumbling down. And I remember to this day, I remember sitting on the floor of the restaurant and we just closed everything down. And at the time I'd put all of our chairs and our tables and, the cups and the saucers and all of these things in this local paper to kind of sell. And I remember waiting for this guy who was coming to pick up the bar stools that would sit up at the breakfast bar of the restaurant. And I remember it was in that moment, I was alone in the restaurant. I was sitting on the floor. So many things had already left. It was relatively empty. And there was just the humming sound of one of the fridges. And I just remember in that moment, I just broke down. I broke down and I burst into tears. And it was that ugly crying where you're wailing and snot is dripping out of your nose and you can't get it together and you're hyperventilating. And I just remember being what is going on? What is going on? How did I end up in this situation? And how am I going to get myself out of this situation? My body was in so much stress. I had lost so much weight. I was so in this space of just hypervigilance and I was so used to being in survival, and my body finally had this massive release, right, of just so much came out. Anyhow, then there's this knock on the glass window and I had to kind of wipe away my tears and blow my nose and hand over these chairs to this guy who was taking them for his bar. And that moment is so clear in my mind of just what did I do wrong? How did this go so wrong? How did I end up here? Now, that was about 8 years ago at the time of recording this. And since then, I took a step back and I went back and I studied and I became a psychotherapist. I did my master's and I really stopped and I really kind of thought about what is it that led me to this space? How do I take a long, hard look at myself, not with the lens of judgment, not with the lens of criticism, but rather through the lens of compassion and just say what did I not see at the time? What beliefs, what nervous system patterns, what subconscious identity was I operating from that led me to make all of these decisions, including the decision in my relationship, right? How do I allow myself to get into these situations where I know in my intuition it's wrong for me? I know in my intuition these things are bad. I know that something's not working out. And yet I continue to stay. And I'm curious, like, I'm sure so many of you have had situations in your lives that are the same, right? And it's not that there's anything bad or wrong with us, but it's so interesting when everything comes crumbling down and we can look at it objectively because we have nothing left, right? You can look at it objectively and just be like, wow, let me learn from this. Let me learn from this. And this is like such an important pivot, right? Whenever we enter into, if it's adult trauma, financial trauma, any form of hardship where we kind of hit that rock bottom, we have a choice to stay there. We have a choice to stay there in that space of victimhood, or we have the opportunity to say, what can I learn from this? What could I do differently? And how can I evolve as a human being? Now, it took me a couple of years to get to that point. So I'm not saying this happened overnight for any of you being like, oh my God, I can't do that. It took me a little while to get to that point, but I definitely wanted to understand myself better. And fast forward to now, right? Fast forward to now, there were a lot of decisions that I made, from that moment sitting in the restaurant and the subsequent kind of weeks and probably year that came after that of me, like literally counting cents in my car to make sure I had enough. I would put like $17.20 of petrol into my car because I knew I needed $5.80 to be able to like buy me that thing that I wanted for my lunch tomorrow. And that was literally how my nervous system was operating around money for the rest of the year. I went back to study. I decided to move home to Bali, which is where I live now, and it's also where I grew up. And I came back to my family. I came back to my roots, and I really came back to this space of healing where I did so much self-inquiry work. Now, fast forward 8 years from that point of me moving back, and I slowly started to rebuild my life and rebuild my career through a very different lens. This experience or that experience of hardship gave me this magnifying glass on looking at who I had been conditioned to be, like how I had evolved as a child into an adult and what beliefs and identity I thought I needed to have in order to be liked, in order to be accepted, in order to be successful, versus who was I actually? What did I actually value? What did success actually mean to me as a person and not society's version of it, right? What did I really need to understand? What did I really need to conceptualize? What did I really need to believe in? What did I fundamentally need to have to change at a nervous system level and at a subconscious level in order to build a business differently, in order to build a life differently? And this entire, I guess, project that I'm working on at the moment, this podcast, this YouTube channel, it's all about helping to understand or helping you to understand how to make decisions that come from, for lack of a better word, your soul and not your ego. How do we recognize when we are making choices in our lives that are very much surface level conditioning and learned behaviors that keep us in that survival state versus what we actually believe to be true and meaningful and what actually gives our lives a sense of purpose? So I took a lot of this stuff. I took a lot of my own self-inquiry, a lot of my own values work, and I started to build my life again from nothing into what it is now, whereby I am the sole provider of my family. I have a very successful business as a therapist, as a business coach, and a manifestation mentor. I have a wonderfully healthy little boy, a son. I live a very wonderful life. I have everything that I could possibly need. My body feels at ease. I feel at peace. I get to have a freedom-based business where I have a lot of time with my child, a lot of time with my husband, and a lot of time with my clients and my students, making a big impact on the world and helping people through the lens of this really compassion-focused, values-led approach. I have a business that was able to be built very slowly and in alignment to what my nervous system needed. I was able to rewire my money mindset in order to be able to bring in more wealth and more abundance and to no longer live my life from a place of shame and not good enoughness. I've published and written my first book, and life is good. Life is good, and I feel at ease. Do I have all of the shiny things? Not necessarily, because it's not something that I actually value. The way that I define success and the way that I define wealth is not about the things, but it's about this feeling of contentment, this feeling of purpose, of meaning, that I want to look back on my life when I am 80 or 90 and I want to say, yeah, like I lived a life that was in alignment to what I truly believe in. If the shiny objects come in later on, amazing, great, cool. I can have fun with that in this one life that I have. That's wonderful, right? But it's not something I'm chasing. Something that I'm chasing that has led to my subsequent happiness, contentment, wealth, connection, presence, and peace is living a life that is in alignment with my values and building a business that is sustainable, that's been able to grow with what my nervous system capacity can hold, right? And this is exactly what I want to teach you across the episodes that I offer to you in this podcast on this channel. Okay, so we're going to be exploring everything from nervous system safety to manifestation hacks to understanding how your childhood conditioning and your inner child drives your business decisions, through to values-led decision making, through to money mindset rewiring, all of these things. And ultimately, I want to help you to understand that heart-led hustle is you still being productive, right? In order to have a business and a life, and if we're talking about business, a business that actually brings in a profit, a business that actually grows sustainably, we still got to be productive, right? It's just like, where does that productivity come from? What is the source of the decisions of that productivity? On one side of the coin, it could look like constant hustle to the point of burning out, making decisions from very wounded places within us, and, ultimately not feeling any form of contentment or success or happiness or anything, despite what we might look like on the outside, versus, living a life or running a business that actually feels as good on the inside as it looks on the outside. So thank you very much for being here. If you loved hearing this story, if you have anything similar going on in your life, please leave a comment, send me a message, let me know so that we're all in this together, and know that if I've been able to change, if I've been able to shift from that place of financial hardship, losing everything, feeling, so much shame, so much embarrassment, being at that point where I just didn't know how I was going to get out of it, to now shifting everything in my life and feeling the way that I do and helping others to do the same, then you can also get out of where you're at. I promise you can, but it just takes a lot of honest looking at ourselves and the willingness to see things differently, and the willingness to take small, micro, bravery steps, aligned action that actually gets us to what we desire. And that is a form of hustle. It's just heart-led, right? It's not ego-led. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next episode.